receive Cubans, but now they see it as a problem. And then now they're seeing, how can we maintain in touch with these folks that are leaving? It's not unusual to have expats that live in other countries. For Cuba it is, but in general in the world, that's a phenomenon that's been, long understood. Now they want to establish that link between the expat community, the diaspora community, and the country. The gut instinct is correct. I'm doing interviews of new arrivals here, and it's clear that their motivation to leave is dominantly economics. Economics in Cuba is not that separate from the government, given it's a centralized economy. So they blame the government for them having to leave, but it's because of economic reasons. And they're immediately thinking of how to do business back in Cuba. The bright side of this huge immigration is that in the long run, it might actually benefit the Cuban economic development.
Cuba is not what you might call a market-embracing or market-oriented economy. Is the government there equipped with the tools necessary to kind of get out of this?
Well, the short answer is probably no. Right now, there is a sense that the folks that want more opening up of the economy, particularly, have a leg up because the situation is so dire that folks are beginning to think somewhat outside the box. And creating these small business enterprises, the MIPYMEs, that is a big step forward, and they are growing. There is a class structure being developed, not as quickly as during the Obama years, but even now you do have these private sector enterprises that are beginning to grow.
Guillermo Grenier is professor of sociology in the Department of Global and Sociocultural Studies at Florida International University. Professor Grenier, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And we've got a lot more from that interview on our website and podcast. In New York, I'm Sabri Ben-Achour with the Marketplace Morning Report. From APM, American Public Media.
ViStar Credit Union and 121 Financial Credit Union, two of Jacksonville's credit unions, are now coming together, all to better serve our members and give back to Jacksonville, the city we call home. Learn more at ViStar121merger.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Ahead in the next 5 minutes, live local news for the First Coast from the WJCT News team.
It's the biggest headlines of 2023. We take a look at the year in news, from the heartbreaking to the hopeful. I'm joined by 4 of my favorite reporters for our annual Year in Review. Among our topics, book bans, the arrival of a new mayor, the departure of a school superintendent, and a racist mass shooting. Later in the program, we hear from our own Jacksonville music experience about their favorite albums of 2023. What stories from 2023 are going to stick with you? We want to hear from you today. Give us a call at 549-2937, email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can message us on social media. It's all ahead after the day's news.
It's a minute after 9 o'clock. This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. I'm Michelle Coram. Conservationists are celebrating a recent find of 2 federally threatened snake hatchlings out in Liberty County's Apalachicola Bluffs and Ravines Preserve. As Molly Durig tells us, the discovery suggests a species reintroduction program based at the Central Florida Zoo and Botanical Gardens is working.
The 2 hatchlings spotted earlier this month are eastern indigo snakes, a federally threatened species wildlife experts in Florida are working to recover. The Nature Conservancy says it's the first discovery in 7 years of eastern indigo snakes born in the wild. marking a milestone for a species reintroduction program based at the Central Florida Zoo and Botanical Gardens Orion Center for Indigo Conservation. Field biologist Michelle Hoffman, who works for the Orion Center, says the eastern indigo snake plays an important ecosystem regulator role. It eats other animals but is harmless to humans.
They're big and very impressive. So somebody, if they saw one, might be a little intimidated, at first glance if they don't know what they're looking at. But they are very gentle and docile snakes.
Hoffman says indigo snakes are commensals for gopher tortoises, meaning the two species generally coexist without harming each other. In Orlando, I'm Molly Durig.
Here in Northeast Florida, the deadline for bidding on pre-construction and planning services to the city of Jacksonville for work on Everbank Stadium has been extended until January 10th. According to the Jacksonville Daily Record, multiple firms say they needed more time to prepare due to the scope and complexity of the project. Renovating the stadium and building a dining and entertainment district has been estimated to cost up to $2 billion. It's now 56 degrees and cloudy in Jacksonville. Breezy today from the northeast. Temperatures will be in the upper 60s and low 50s overnight.
This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Opinions expressed on the First Coast Week in Review are those of our panelists and do not necessarily reflect the views of WJCT News 89.9.
Good morning, and I'm Ann Schindler. You're listening to First Coast Connect. It's the final Friday of 2023, meaning it's time for our annual year in review. And what a year it's been. The city of Jacksonville welcomed a new mayor, endured a racist mass shooting, and may have finally begun to enumerate and prepare for the impacts of climate change. Local headlines included 2 cases of unbelievable brutality by St. Johns County students, as well as a $1.6 billion Powerball winner. Later in the show, we're going to be talking to our own Jacksonville Music Experience contributors to share their favorite albums of 2023. But first, I'm joined by 4 of the best minds in local journalism to discuss the year in news. Andrew Pantazzi, editor and reporter at the Jax Tributary. Thanks for being here. Yeah. Keith Nelson, anchor and reporter at First Coast News.
Hey, Ann.
Good morning. Claire Goforth, reporter at the Daily Dot.
Good morning.
Good morning. Investigative reporter at the Daily Dot. David Bauerlein, Metro reporter at the Florida Times-Union. Welcome.
Good morning.
To our listeners, we also want to hear from you. What do you think the biggest stories of the year were? And what stories do you think didn't get enough attention? Join our conversation at 549-2937. Email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also reach out on social media, and you can watch our video stream right now, which is live on Facebook and the WJCT YouTube page. An ugly new day dawned in Jacksonville on August 23rd. That's when a shooter went into a Dollar General in Jacksonville and gunned down 3 black people, specifically because of their race. Speaking after the shooting, Jacksonville Sheriff T.K. Waters said the shooter's weapons were painted with swastikas and his racist ideology was a matter of record.
Portions of these manifestos detail the shooter's disgusting ideology of hate. Plainly put, this shooting was racially motivated, and he hated black people.
Claire Goforth, this is a story that you've covered and sadly one that you've seen reflected in reporting that you've done around the country.
Yes, I mean, we are seeing an escalation of hateful rhetoric against various minority groups. And when the tragedy unfolded at the Dollar General in August, we later learned that the shooter had been consuming that very same ideology that you're seeing online a lot, and that he particularly idolized Dylan Roof, the racist mass shooter from nearby. And, this is corresponding with a rise in anti-Semitic incidents around Jacksonville, most recently on the first day of Hanukkah, when we saw billboards defaced and various other incidents like that. There are very many active hate groups in Florida itself, and there are active hate groups here at home. And now, City Council did pass a resolution to try to crack down on the laser light displays of anti-Semitic images and messages earlier this year. But there are still questions about how much more they can do and how strong a stance they should and can take against this hateful rhetoric that we're seeing. And particularly with the coming presidential election, the election cycle, it's going to really shake out a lot of these really awful people in our community.
Keith Nelson, this attack at the Dollar General came just a day shy of the 63rd anniversary of Axe Handle Saturday, which is an equally dark day in Jacksonville where white people attacked black protesters who were trying to do a sit-in, a peaceful protest in downtown Jacksonville, and they were beaten.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't just the protesters that were beaten. It was pretty much anyone they saw out there that was black. They attacked them with those axe handles. But it was the date of that shooting that really got me, the Dollar General shooting, the date, August of this year. It was the same day that we saw the March on Washington in Washington, D.C. It was 5 years to the day of the Jacksonville Landing shooting. And then, as you mentioned, the day before Axe Handle Saturday. So it's a little painful to think that this person likely sat down and thought, what could be the day that I could make the most destruction, cause the most pain? And that was it. That was it. And it was, 3 people lost their lives. That was just awful. But the date really, really stuck out to me.
And worth noting that the names of the people who were killed that day, Gerald Gallion, who was a 29-year-old customer at Dollar General, Angela Carr, who was a 52-year-old Uber driver who was waiting for her ride outside the Dollar General, and A.J. Laguerre Jr., who worked there as a clerk, just 19 years old.
Babies.
David Bauerlein, obviously a very difficult incident that occurred. What has the community been doing to try to respond and manage the rise in, hate and hateful rhetoric?
Yeah, well, I think it is. You mentioned the parallel to Axe Handle Saturday. Axe Handle Saturday was really a manifestation of the culture of the legal system at the time. I mean, it was not when there was an attack by white people wielding axes on black people protesting for civil rights. There was not any kind of condemnation. It was viewed as kind of the way things ought to be by the power structure. So that's a great question. And what is different in terms of how the response has been? I mean, certainly you had a black sheriff condemning the attack and talking about it in very strong terms. You've had a resolution from city council. I think what the community is still waiting on was some of the promises that there would be a response that actually gets at some of the underlying problems, social ills, disparities in that part of the city. And that has not happened yet. There are a lot of promises about this time will be different. I think they're still waiting to hear what's going to be different this time in terms of how the city responds to addressing some of the long-standing inequalities that we see across this city, the tale of two cities that has been here for a long time.
Andrew Pantazzi, how has what's happening at the state level impacted what we're experiencing here in Jacksonville, if anything? Obviously, there's a lot of rhetoric around race, around the teaching of Black history, around using woke ideology, kind of pushing back on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. How does what's happening there impact what we're seeing here, if at all?
Well, I mean, one of the clearest ways, which I know we've talking about this later on in this segment, but is when it comes to the use of race in redistricting. Governor DeSantis vetoed the legislature's efforts to continue to draw a district that has been around for 30 years in Jacksonville that has allowed Black residents in Jacksonville to elect a candidate of their choice, to have the ability to elect a candidate of their choice. He very strongly opposed that, vetoed the Republican legislature, and set a line in the sand that he did not believe it was appropriate to allow race to be a factor in redistricting. And the result of that is we have this shooting, this tragic mass killing of Black people because of their race. And at the events after it, one of the people that's missing is a congressional representative who looks like the people who were killed, and who was the candidate of choice for the people who were killed. And I think that has changed what it looks like on a national landscape, who's able to speak for the residents in this area. I think similarly, what we saw is the state representative for that area is Angie Nixon. Last legislative session, she was put in a basement, in a literal basement. Every one of her appropriations was vetoed, line item vetoed by the governor.
She is Black, we should say.
And she is a Black Democrat representing that area. And I think that, again, shows when it comes to representation, one of the disparities of, we can get resolutions, we can get, I think, much better than where we were 50 years ago, 60 years ago, in terms of there's at least people who are speaking and at least sometimes naming what's happening. I think Sheriff Waters, his speech after the killing was very important. He named what was going on, that this was a killing based on racist ideology. He used the words, the offensive, hurtful words of the shooter to make clear where this came from. And I think that's something we wouldn't have had 50, 60 years ago. So I do think we can see the clear strides that we've made, but also we can see when it comes to the importance politically and in terms of who has control of power and resources, that Black residents in Jacksonville, now more than they have perhaps at any point in the last 30 years, are seeing their power shrink when it comes to Florida politics.
Keitha, he's talking about one person that, wasn't there, this representative that would have been a candidate of that community's choice. One person who was there was the governor, and he was received rather
negatively.
Negatively. Yeah, he was booed.
Yeah, he was booed. I remember that clearly, the booing. What was even more interesting was Jacoby Pittman, Councilwoman Jacoby Pittman, speaking up for him. She got a lot of backlash for that from the Black community in particular, because it made her seem as if, I'm going to say it, some use the word as well, and Uncle Tom, why are you backing up this governor that is clearly not for us? This is what everyone is saying. And I think since then she's maybe gained back her clout, I would say, because Jacoby is really for the people. I mean, anyone who has covered her at all, you'll know that. She is one of those that she's down in the trenches with the people. She's worked with the Clara White Mission for so long. But that's what stood out in my mind when the booing happened to Governor DeSantis. She pretty much told the crowd to stop. He's here, to give funds to the families, which was that did happen.
Just briefly, Claire, one thing that also happened later in the year was a redlining settlement. U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland came to town to announce that he had reached a settlement with Ameris Bank, which is a, on our skyline bank, which didn't admit any wrongdoing, but the allegations were really serious in terms of not lending to Black neighborhoods.
Yes, redlining in 2023. I mean, it's interesting to me. We see the governor saying that we don't need woke ideology and we don't need these books in schools, and then districts banning books that specifically have to do with racial equity and inclusion. And at the same time, we have a redlining settlement, and then we have a racist mass shooting in our city, and we lose power for the Black community in representation. And, how can you say that we have come to this post-racist society if all of these things are currently happening?
I want to move on to talk about some goings-on in city government. David Bauerlein, obviously the biggest headline of the year probably is the arrival of a Democratic mayor in Jacksonville. How has the Deegan administration moved since she was sworn in, and how much of a sea change was it to have her elected?
So obviously it was historic. Number one, because it was the first woman ever elected mayor in Jacksonville. That was a historic thing that other cities have done. And so the fact that Jacksonville did that was historic. In terms of moving over to the governing side of thing, I think she's had a solid 6 months. I don't think it's been a sea change. It is still a Republican-controlled city council. And so I don't know that you could look back and say, what has happened in this 6 months that wouldn't have happened if, say, Lenny Curry continued as mayor for another 6 months. I don't think there's been a big dramatic change in terms of the city's agenda that I've seen out of City Hall. Now, there's certainly going to be changes in terms of her appointees. The mayor has appointments to a lot of boards and commissions. Those can have influence, and she has obviously been appointing people who are like-minded, who are going to carry out perhaps policies and views that share her. But that's not an immediate change. I mean, that takes time as well. So I think everybody's still kind of waiting to see. After 6 months, it's been a solid 6 months, but I certainly don't think you can say that there's been a sea change at City Hall.
It's probably worth noting, Andrew, that just in the last week, her chief of staff, who is the first Black female chief of staff for the mayor's office, departed the office. It's not really clear what is going to happen to her next. She's apparently not left city government entirely. Maybe is going to be reassigned somewhere. What significance do you attach to that? And what do you know about what happened?
Yeah, this is a very common thing that's happened in administrations. I think of Mayor Payton coming in with Sam Musa and Walt Bucels as two people he was bringing in to help run government. Mayor Payton, like Mayor Deegan, came from the private sector did not have public sector experience, and I think seeing the what happened there was he then got rid of Sam Musa quickly into it. Another example, I talked about this one-on-one with Mayor Delaney, former mayor in the 90s, who also was part of Mayor Ed Austin's administration, and he talked about how you need to find the right position for certain people, and when it comes to transitions, you're going to appoint people to the wrong position, and you've got to be quick to recognize that. And one of the examples he gave in Ed Austin's administration was that Mike Weinstein is an incredible CFO. Mike Weinstein's been around in city government for 30 years. Before that, he was at the state attorney's office, and he's been CFO for many mayors, and that he is incredible at that role. Initially, he was, I think, chief of staff or chief administrative officer for Ed Austin, and that wasn't the right role for him. And that finding where is the right place to put people, I think some of the criticisms that may have come up during Mayor Brown's or Mayor Curry's administration was, I think Mayor Curry, sometimes it was there was someone appointed who then stayed in that role the entire administration, but maybe was just pushed to the side. And so their title may have been policy director or whatever other director they were given, but they weren't actually doing that job. It was just they're now shoved to the side because they no longer are getting along or they're not in the right position. So I think that would be the positive outtake. The other side is whether this causes dysfunction, whether this means that she now has to go through a new ramping up, getting Darnell Smith, the new chief of staff, up to speed, whether this delays anything. But if it does, it's probably right to do it in the first term and not, deep into the administration where now it's harder to turn the ship around.
And that is a little bit of an unusual arrangement. We could talk just briefly about it, but she has brought on Darnell, who is going to be paid by Florida Blue, which is his current employer. I guess he's going to kind of take some time from there, work for the mayor. It does seem a little strange, Keitha, but I don't know that there's anything necessarily untoward about it. People have raised some questions as to whether that maybe poses some kind of conflict of interest for him to be paid by an outside entity that is not connected to the mayor's office. I did want to move on, though, talk about the MLK breakfast. So this year, for the first time in 5 years, the city began planning for a unified Martin Luther King breakfast celebration. And that was a big deal.
Yeah, it really was. It's pleasant to see. I'm going to go ahead and say that. We did see a divide for quite some time. There were two different breakfasts, and it's supposed to be a day that stands for unity, right? Martin Luther King Day, Martin Luther King breakfast, but instead we're pretty divided. So it's nice to see that we are going to have a unified breakfast for the entire city. We'll see how it pans out. Hopefully, things will go as planned, go well. But you were mentioning not seeing many differences in this administration to that one. That's the first thing that came to mind was this MLK breakfast. Obviously, we hadn't had it during Curry's administration. So, slight changes. We're seeing them. Yeah.
No doubt, yeah. Keith. I mean, that is a change. And I'm thinking, though, in sort of the policies, the agenda, moving the city in a completely different direction. Certainly, the Deegan administration has worked hard to kind of do some of those unifying type events. And I think the fact that if she hadn't been able to do that, that would have been just really an awful thing for administration to still have two MLK breakfasts after pledging that she was going to be a unifying candidate. So, but that's to her credit. She's done that.
Symbolism matters. Little things, they count up. They add up.
Yep. We got a call. Stanley is joining us from the north side. Good morning, Stanley. Welcome to First Coast Connect.
Good morning to everybody. Yes, I was 6 years old when Axe Handle Saturday happened, and I was downtown when it took place. But my main concern here, I am a little disappointed with the mayor, the president mayor, and I voted for the president mayor. I advocated for the president mayor on WJCT before she campaigned but I have been disappointed because this breakfast would not bring the African American community together. The biggest problem when it comes to the African American community is the African American leadership, because none of our 54 years unmet needs has been addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Stanley. Thoughts on that, Keitha?
I'll jump in. I think that he's alluding to the fact that the promises of consolidation, which I can't even put a number on the number of times that I have said this on this show, have not been met. We still have lacking infrastructure. We still have schools that are in Black communities that are crumbling, and there's just this disparity of resources that have been distributed to Black communities in Jacksonville, which has continued to present day. And people get so tired, like the caller, of hearing the same promises again and again and then never seeing them fulfilled.
I'm glad you're able to read between the lines there, because it took me like, where is he going? But I do agree. But these are issues that we've seen for generations. Hopefully, I don't want to say they'll continue for generations. I agree, though, it is time that we see some real change, solid change. Hopefully we will.
One of the big stories of the year, Andrew, was one that your publication, The Tributary, broke and has continued to follow, and that is it actually began last year, but it's the quality of medical care at the jail. Update us on what happened with that story. There was a number of deaths there, but also a change in the management of the healthcare system at the jail.
Yeah, so what we reported, my colleague Nicole, showed that deaths at the Duval County Jail at the pretrial detention facility have tripled ever since the former sheriff, privatized the medical care back in 2017. Since then, the number of deaths each year has tripled, and we're, again, seeing another very tragic year, 15 deaths at the jail, and that private contract was a $98 million contract. They scrapped that contract and signed a no-bid contract with another private medical provider for $110 million. We requested procurement records. The sheriff promised he had done due diligence. The procurement records don't show any due diligence. They don't show any, in-depth look into other alternatives. It looks like this is just a provider who also is providing in Tampa. And we're waiting to see if the extra money going toward medical care in the jail will make a difference. But a lot of these stories, these autopsies, these reports that we pulled are really tragic. It's people who had medical conditions and were not getting treatment when they should have. It's preventable deaths. And this doesn't even include all of the deaths, because one of the cases that we looked at was a man who died out of custody, but he had gone in after having a heart transplant, had a dispute with his neighbor over who was paying Wi-Fi, and told the neighbor, if you don't pay your share, I'm going to beat you. He was a disabled man. The other guy was also a disabled man. They were elderly men who were shouting at each other. Police come and they arrest him, and he's begging the guy, saying, I'm going to die if you arrest me, and I don't have my meds. He goes into jail after this heart transplant, doesn't get his meds the entire time he's in the jail, and then he comes out and his body rejects his heart. We see examples like that. And the excuses that are given are, well, that's an expensive medication. It's hard to get. You can't expect us to have every medication on hand. But we're arresting people, and their lives are in the balance, and they are depending on the city to keep them alive while they are in custody. And right now, the sheriff's office is failing to do that. In double digits every year, people dying.
We are talking about the biggest stories of 2023. We invite you to join our conversation. You can give us a call at 549-2937. You can send an email to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. And you can also message us on First Coast Connect Facebook and Instagram pages. We have a call now. AJ in Arlington. Good morning, AJ. Welcome to First Coast Connect.
Good morning, everybody, and Merry Christmas. This is AJ from Mad Dads here in Jacksonville. And I just want to remember the two children that was killed. Kaylin Matthews, she was killed on September 24th on AC Skinner for a dog deal gone bad. And Mike King Sims, he was killed 3 days later, September 27th on King Street, when somebody busted in the house and shot him to death. Just want to bring attention back to those two cases and also the other homicide victims in our city. Thank you very much.
Thanks, AJ, and thanks for the work that you do with Mad Dads. And it's good to remember those child deaths. Let's talk a little bit about crime in the city. A number of cases really captured attention this year, not least just the murder rate alone, David Bauerlein. There's also a really controversial arrest of a gentleman who was beaten. Well, let me take that back. He was injured when he was taken into custody. There's no indication that he was beaten. There was video that showed him falling and then maybe kind of being roughly handled. The police have said that they handled it correctly because he was fleeing and he was in possession of a number of illegal things. But JSO has been, called upon to answer questions about the crime rate and their handling of people in their custody. How has that conversation advanced this year?
So, in terms of the crime rate, early in the year there was these sort of declarations that things were turning around, and that has not really been the case. I mean, it's still the same as it ever was in terms of violent crime in Jacksonville. So, I don't think there's been, to use the word we used earlier, sea change. There's been no sea change in terms of violent crime, and so that at some point, this question is what can be done differently? What are the strategies? Then in terms of the use of force, there was the arrest for the use of force. There's been protests about that, and it's one of those things where there's always a line, right? Where does use of force become appropriate? Where does it become excessive? I believe, but I think I'm not in a position to say in that case whether it was excessive or not. Clearly, there were bad injuries. The person was injured. They were hospitalized. Presumably, there's going to be a lawsuit over that. But anytime something like that happens, there's always the question that the police need the community in order to be able to be effective at solving crimes and preventing crimes. Anything that gets in the way of having that community support is a problem for the sheriff's office.
And Keitha, that photo, the mugshot, which really went viral after that arrest, showing Lakean Woods with two eyes swollen shut, and then a later subsequent mugshot taken a couple weeks later where he still had very
bloodshot eyes. Yeah. You're right. We can't say whether it was justified or not. That's not our place to say that. But what we can say is what we saw in the video, right? Police are saying it's not excessive force. What he did was deemed justified, but he was struck 17 times in the face and the body. We saw it happen on that the body camera video, and it was disturbing to see, but we did view it online, on air as well, and we saw the protests. We heard from his mother, other mothers who were hurting after seeing this young man, though we will call him a criminal because he was arrested, seeing but he's still someone's child, and to see that, it was disturbing on so many levels. But again, police say it's justified, so who are we to say otherwise?
But I think we should also remember police claimed he was resisting with violence, and the state attorney's office reduced those charges resisting without violence, which is the difference between he used violence and he didn't use violence is a pretty significant one. And the fact that the state attorney's office was not willing to file the charges that the sheriff's office claimed
says a lot.
Yeah, it does say a lot.
We actually, on this program, received a call from Lakean Woods' mother when Mayor Donna Deegan was on answering questions. Let's hear a little bit about what she had to say.
He's in JSO custody and 23-hour lockdown a day. They're not giving him anything. They're not treating him. He's still pissing blood for a whole week now that he's been doing that. No, they do not have him in a medical facility. They discharged him from the hospital.
Okay, I will follow up on that again, Letitia, but because I was told that he.
So she was obviously very animated, Claire. She went to city council that night, said, I spoke to the mayor this morning, and she was very vocal about her concerns about her son's arrest.
Yes, a lot of us had concerns about the arrest. And the thing that I'm thinking of as we're having this conversation is the police keep saying that it wasn't excessive force. Well, when you're saying that, they're relying on the way law defines excessive force in terms of arrests. And the law does give police a lot of leeway to use violence against people that they believe may have committed a crime. And we see again and again that it is disparagingly used against Black people. But one of the real questions is it's not just Black people, it's people across the country and in our community who are having a mental health crisis, or in the case in Lakean Woods, he was just there and what did he run or something, and they chased him and then he ends up arrested. But they had not seen him do anything, as far as I'm aware of, that was clear evidence of a crime. It was only after his arrest that they found things on him. If police are out here, we're trying to deal with violent crime and the murder rate, does it make sense for them to just chase down some kid and beat him and haul him off to jail when, for just standing there?
I think if JSO were to weigh in on this, they would say that they had seen some sort of transaction that they believed he was involved in prior to pulling over that vehicle. So I think that they would push back a little bit on that, but clearly a controversial issue that was one that got national attention, David, for the city.
Oh yeah, the mugshot and the swollen eyes was, and as Keisha said, that was really watching the video, it was ugly to watch. I think that word was used as well by the Sheriff T.K. Waters. It was ugly, and the violence was ugly in that. Now, I believe, y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, was there some belief that he might have been armed as well and he had a gun?
There's always that assumption, right? You don't know.
And look, I mean, I may differ with some people. I do think that being a law officer is a stressful job. It's a dangerous job. I think that if you are trying to arrest somebody and they're running, and then you're trying to bring them into custody, and you think that they might be armed, that there might be force required to be able to put that person into custody. And so, you know, the accusation, I guess, would be that the force they used was above and beyond what was needed, that it was just kind of just punishment of this person for whatever reason. And so, you know, I'm not convinced of that based on what I saw of the video, that there was something where the person was like handcuffed, and then after they were handcuffed, they were beaten. We didn't see that. We saw there was a lot of force, violent force used in the course of that arrest taking
But
place
David,
over
are we
split
saying
seconds.
this is the only time this has happened in Jacksonville? I mean, I've spoken with police officers who are now retired and heard them laugh about the way they treated people who were in custody who had not been convicted of any crime or had resisted arrest at all. Police go around like a hammer and they see everything as a nail. And I know it's a hard job and I respect the job. My cousin is a police officer, not here. But at the same time, we can't keep seeing these videos and these tales from our city. Sometimes there's not videos. Sometimes it's just the body camera wasn't working. And again, see these people brutalized at the hands of police, and then say that there's absolutely no problem.
We've got a call, Tom, on the west side. We're going to move on in a second, but I believe you've got a comment about the LaKean arrest.
Yes, I do. And good morning to you. I just wanted to point out that this is just one of 3 instances that we have video of. Shortly thereafter, there was a 53-year-old woman who was beaten by police, who was also in the passenger seat of a vehicle during a traffic stop. And then more recently, we have another man who fled from the police, was standing amongst the police when a police officer just walked up and punched him in the back. And there's video of that, too. This is clearly a trend. DOJ said they needed a trend, and I think we've got one. Also, to the point that one of your panelists made, I used to work at JU, and we had off-duty police officers, and one of them often remarked that if you run, you're going to get hit.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. We're going to move on now to another big topic this year, schools. Generally speaking, the biggest story, though, out of Florida was clearly book bans, thousands of titles removed from classroom libraries and media centers after complaints about allegedly inappropriate content. Now, the book removals have been broadly criticized by First Amendment advocates and educators and librarians and many parents, but the list continues to grow. And Keith, in most cases, these book challenges are coming from just a handful of people. In Clay County, which has the most banned books, removed books of any district in the United States, most of those, 94% of those, came from just one man.
It's so interesting, and I feel for our educators because I could only imagine being told you have to remove a book because one person said they didn't like it, and that one person continuously making these complaints, and they know all it takes is for you to bring it up once, and then they have to book it, they have to pull it, review it. It really is frustrating, but the main complaints I heard wasn't from parents, it was from educators. Teachers who contacted me like, what is going on? This is frustrating. It's taking away from our time with our students, our lesson plans. Some of them had to just strip their libraries completely. Could you imagine the frustration? Like they aren't dealing with enough, our teachers. Kids can be a handful. Let's think about it. You know, it's a lot extra to deal with. So the frustration, surprisingly, that I got back was not from parents, but mainly from teachers. They were the ones who were really feeling these book bans and the effects of it.
Another big story in Duval County schools was the early departure ahead of her contract of Dr. Diana Green. She was a superintendent in Duval County schools. She was in the midst of a number of issues, scandals, failure to report crimes on campus to the state, big scandals coming out of the Douglas Anderson School of the Arts, where a couple of teachers have been accused of inappropriate, one arrested for sexual misconduct with a student, and he's expected to plead guilty. How much of her own volition was leaving the district, David, and how much of it was just being forced out?
Well, from the outside looking in, it really looked like she was forced out. I mean, I know that it was a retirement, but there was no indication before then, at least publicly, that she was looking to retire. She was really a meaningful superintendent and had a huge number of accomplishments. And I think the year before she was superintendent of the year in Florida, and she had a longer term contract. I think there was just this sense that the Douglas Anderson situation was something that happened on her watch, and so she had to be accountable for it. But she did a lot of other really, really substantive accomplishments over her time as superintendent. And now we don't really have now they're still looking for a superintendent to replace her. It's
Struggling to find a replacement.
It's hard to persuade someone to come to Florida in this environment to become a superintendent of a major school district when you know more and more education policy is being set out of Tallahassee. And regardless of which position you take on those, the conservative policy that is dictating it, that means as a superintendent and as a school board, you have less say, less control over what curriculum are we going to use, how are we going to help teachers. That's being decided by someone else. And so it's, if you disagree with those policies, or if you just feel like you need to be flexible, you want to come into a district where you feel like you have control, as opposed to somebody else is going to dictate to you what you're going to do, and you're going to be on the hook and blamed regardless of what happens. That's a hard position to take to anyone. I think anyone who's had a certain boss that's been like that before, where the boss is telling you exactly how to do something, and you feel like you need some more flexibility. I think that's a hard position for us to recruit right now.
Yeah, that was the argument from those who were defending Dr. Green. They were saying that the allies of Governor DeSantis believed that she wasn't falling in line with his policies, and so she had to get out. And, that's what we end up seeing happen. But we can't take this away from her because you mentioned it. She did have a lot of accomplishments. And it was interesting to see because actually I was asked to host the event. There was a big event for her at the library a couple of months after she officially left office. And they even named a portion of the children's library after this woman. So that tells you about the significant impact she had within this community. So, these things happened at Douglas Anderson under her watch, yes, but you can't take away what she was able to achieve while in office.
It's a tough time to be a superintendent. A lot of counties, Claire, are looking for superintendents right now. And I remember when school board meetings were boring, right?
The good old days of the boring school board meetings. Right. Now they are very charged, and with a lot of passion in that room. The state has again and again been exerting its influence over what's going on in our schools, and this extends into higher education. We're having issues recruiting students and faculty members to work at Florida's university system because there's a perception that if they don't fall in line, that they may be called to question and lose their job, lose their tenure. That is not an environment that many feel is conducive to freedom of expression, freedom of thought, to learning. And Florida has long, hung its hat on having one of the best public education systems in the nation. And the question as we move forward and we see these, talented professors refusing to come here and leaving, is that going to remain the case?
One other issue that was a big one this year, the city finally tackling its climate change future with a big resilience report that was more than a year in the making. It was also, I think, the year that extreme heat became real for a lot of people living in the Jacksonville and Northeast Florida area. We had an intense hit from Idalia. Is the conversation around climate realities changing in a meaningful way, David?
No, I think it is. I think going back to Mayor Deegan, she ran on this issue. She has pledged that it is going to be the issue of our time. And I do think that'll be one of the things when her term comes up is, has she really moved city in that direction? Have there really been changes in terms of how the city positions itself for this reality? This is a city of rivers and creeks and streams and oceans. It is vulnerable to climate change, but it's something that's one of those classic cases of you make the investments now against something that's not going to have a return over many, many years. So that's a real political uphill struggle, but I do think people are becoming more attuned to climate change, even though it is very much a more and more of a partisan issue where Democrats are more concerned about it than Republicans.
Another issue that's going to be very costly when you talk about big investments in the future is the stadium, which is obviously a big story from this year. What did we learn about progress, Andrew, on this issue, where we think the mayor's head's at, where we think the Jaguars are at in terms of negotiating for this $2 billion project?
Yeah, so we're still waiting to see what comes out of actual negotiations. A huge factor affecting it is also the debt service that's going to be very costly right now, unlike during the previous 8 years when we had basically free debt and super low interest rates. Interest rates are high right now, and that makes everything all the costlier. And we've seen from the council president, he wants us to go through a normal course of business. He's not looking for an emergency passage, which has a higher vote threshold and failed previously when the Jags had a request for an economic development deal. Which also means that they would have time to vet and to go through this. And so this is going to be a big deal. There are many things that come up in a mayoral administration that past mayors and their top administrators would tell you they never wanted to be the thing that they would be known for, but that is what comes up during your time. And sometimes you have to deal with what's going on. And I think for Mayor Deegan, she may have other priorities, but what comes out of the Jaguar Stadium deal, how good of a deal it is for taxpayers, how much it binds the Jaguars to staying here, how much it leads to actual economic development in the area, that's going to be part of her legacy, whether she wants it to be or not. And so whatever comes out of City Hall, this is going to end up being a priority for the city, one that she's probably going to be known for. I can think of so many other mayors who had something roll over into their term that, for Mayor Payton, he had to deal with the leftovers of the Better Jacksonville plan and the Duval County Courthouse, something that was all his predecessors. But he's the one who has to deal with how do you distribute the funds? How do you contract this out? So many mayors, you get something that you inherit, and whether you want it to be or not, it's part of your legacy.
Right.
And I think this will be one of the biggest things.
Pension for Lenny Curry,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. Keitha, do you think that the stadium deal is going to be the story of 2024?
This is a big one. I can't say it's going to be the story. I deal with breaking news, so I can't say that. You never know what'll happen. But yeah, it's definitely a big one. I remember interviewing Donna when she was running for the election, and that was one of the first questions I answered her. And it's listening to her as someone who grew up in Jacksonville, right? She's talking about the Jaguars and going to the games, how important it is. I can't see her letting it leave. Like, the stadium has to be rebuilt. It fixed up. It has to stay here in Jacksonville. And it's going to be interesting to see what'll happen. Will it be the top story of 2024? Who knows? You can't predict that. I can't.
Right. And Claire, she has hired a team of negotiators. Do you think that the city's going to be in a better position than perhaps they have been on earlier lease deals with the Jaguars and other stadium renovation deals that they've signed on to?
I mean, that's the hope. My understanding is the previous deal, the city basically got hosed. And that this time we are hoping that there's going to be a structure in the deal, like Andrew said, where we get a greater share of what money pours through that stadium. I mean, I don't think Mayor Deegan wants to be the mayor that loses the NFL team, even though for many Jacksonville residents, that is such a small issue in terms of what their daily lives are. And they just don't like to think that, my neighborhood is dealing with this huge infrastructural project that is a nightmare that was supposed to last a month. And 7 months later, it's still dragging on. That money is going to go somewhere, coming from somewhere. And if the Jaguars are getting it just so that people can go and watch an NFL game, I might be a little bit more frustrated with my daily commute than I am interested in keeping a team, or maybe if the school in my neighborhood is failing, or there's a high crime rate in my neighborhood, there's blight in my neighborhood. All these are true of my neighborhood. So, these are really serious issues that are affecting people all over the city. And I love watching the Jags, but, I don't want to see my neighbor get shot.
And David, just briefly on that issue, if the city is engaging in debt and expensive debt service, as Andrew alluded to, that does impact the money that it has to play with when it comes to all kinds of other priorities, transitioning off of septics, downtown development, any kind of, hope to alleviate homelessness and low-income housing.
Yeah, it squeezes out a lot of your other spending priorities, and and that has to get done first, and then you find out afterwards how much money you have left over. Because I do agree with with Clara and Keith that there will be a deal. It's going to be a very expensive deal. One of the big questions will be if we're going to put up all this money, what happens if the Jags were to leave? What kind of clawback is there? There's going to be a big fight over a lot of these internal issues to the lease that are going to be really interesting to watch too.
A lot to pay attention to. It's time now, though, for our lightning round. So what are the issues or stories that you're going to be following in the weeks and months ahead? Keith and Nelson, what you got going?
I'm sorry, I'm laughing at the lightning round. So Changemakers, it's going to air on Christmas Day at 5:30 on NBC 12 and 4 p.m. on Christmas Eve. So Changemakers is a series I've been working on throughout the year. You're going to hear from some legendary people here in Jacksonville, folks who have really made a difference. Some history makers, Nathaniel Glover, John Delaney, you mentioned him as well, former mayor of Jacksonville, Tom Coughlin, how could I forget him? The Jaguars' first head coach. A lot of people, Donna Orender, people who have really forged for change within this community and far beyond. You'll hear from them. Changemakers happening Christmas Day. Just tune in. It's going to be a really uplifting series, so make sure you watch.
Yeah, and don't miss it. Keith really does exceptional pieces. So
thank you. I'm getting a little tired, by the way, Ann. I've been up to 3 this morning. I'm starting to dwindle down. So
yes, you're doing fine. You're doing fine. Claire, go forth. What are you going to be watching for?
Well, just to toot my own horn, plug a story that I have coming up. I've been working on a series throughout the fall about white supremacy in America and white supremacists specifically in various communities around the country to which I've traveled to. And one of those communities that I am highlighting is Jacksonville in Northeast Florida. So keep an eye out for that in mid-January in the Daily Dot.
Great work. Thanks, Claire. Andrew Pantazzi.
So I'll list two things. One is the jail, which they're also another big expense looking at building a new jail and how City Council deals with that when, it's not just the Jaguars that they'll be needing to press. It's also the sheriff's office and vetting to see this massive new expense that is going to come to city taxpayers. And the other is the Florida Supreme Court has so many cases that have been pending for a long time, including on abortion restrictions and an abortion referendum which would put in the Constitution an explicit right to abortion. Whether they allow that to go on the ballot, I think is going to give good indications of this new Florida Supreme Court, almost all of whom have been appointed now by Governor DeSantis, just how conservative they are.
David Bauerlein.
Yeah, in January, there's going to be huge votes by City Council on the Laura Street Trio, 3 historic buildings in downtown. Huge amount of money at stake for taxpayers, huge amount of risk, big consequential decision for the future of those buildings.
I'm going to be keeping an eye on the JEA trial, which is going to probably hit in February. So lots of big news. Thanks, Andrew Pantazzi, Keith and Nelson, Claire Goforth, and David Bauerlein. Thanks so much for your reflections on 2023.
Thank you, and happy holidays.
Happy holidays, y'all.
And when we come back, the team from JME joins us to celebrate the year that was in music.
The Florida Star newspaper has turned 72 years old and is still serving communities as a thoughtful small business. You won't believe what we are doing next. Stay in the know by picking up a Florida Star newspaper or logging on to thefloridastar.com.
Wayne Hogan of the Terrell Hogan Personal Injury and Wrongful Death Law Firm. Serious injury cases are complex, and civil trial attorneys present the evidence juries need to see and hear. More at waynehogan.law.
Colorado's Supreme Court delivers a blow to the Republican Party's presidential frontrunner.
I do not believe Donald Trump should be prevented from being president of the United States by any court. I think he should be prevented from being president of the United States by the voters of this country.
Texas signs into law a bill making illegal immigration a state crime, and Minnesota's new flag leaves some in a flap. More on the news roundup next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. This week, the Jacksonville Music Experience team shared a list of their favorite albums of the year, from millennial melancholy of indie pop artists like Boy Genius and Mitski to the return of hip-hop legends Killer Mike and Nas to jazz, R&B, rock, and global sounds. So the list includes 60 albums, each one loved by one or more members of the JME team. I'm here to talk about their favorite albums of 2023. Our WJCT Arts and Culture editor, Matt Shaw. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks. And JME contributors, Chris Marquez and Mr. Al Pete.
Hey, good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for being here. Matt, how did this list come together?
Yeah, so simple prompt to our contributor group was just give me 5 to 10 of your favorite albums of the year. And I think there's like this thing in music journalism now where like people are a little bit more uncomfortable with ranking albums, you know, like number 1 through 50 or something like that. It's like it's really hard to compare, say that like the Boy Genius record is better than the Nas record because it's like two different art forms. You know, they're both great records. So we wanted to talk about them as our favorites, as a sort of a platform to share the music that we really loved this year.
And so, Mr. Al Pete, your faves were some of the legends of hip hop. It was the 50th anniversary. There was a lot of coverage about the 50th anniversary, but what rose on your list?
All of it, but specifically Killer Mike. Killer Mike, in my opinion, was my favorite album of the year. Just full of fusion of gospel, jazz, Atlanta hip hop, for sure. Just that essence of it. So the song "Scientists and Engineers" featuring Andre 3000, which he released the album as well, with no words. So for people to be like, oh, you know, there's no rapping in it, I'm like, he dropped one of the best lyrics or best rhymes of the year.
He did rap in 2023.
He did, absolutely.
He
did.
Just not on his own album.
Yeah, yeah.
Chris Marquez, the biggest indie acts were some great songwriters who talked about big feelings. What caught your ear this year?
So there were so many that I really loved, but especially the indie rock folk supergroup Boy Genius, made up of Phoebe Bridgers, Julian Baker, and Lucy Dacus. I love all of them as artists individually, so when they came back together for the first time in 5 years to put together the record, it was just such an amazing album. Lots of themes of friendship and just like the love that comes with like platonic love feelings. And it was great seeing their show at Madison Square Garden, sold out in October.
Good
Yeah,
for
no, that
you.
was insane.
Wow.
I cried so much. Like, it was great.
So we're going to hear a little bit.
Goosebumps all over. I love them.
They'd had one of the biggest tours of the year too, like outside of like Taylor Swift, you know, her globally like record smashing tour. The Boy Genius tour was like, you know, a huge deal.
It was insane. Like seeing all of it like through TikTok and Instagram first, and then being able to actually see it live. Awesome experience.
Yeah. Let me add real quick too that Killer Mike had a tour as well, and I went and saw him perform. Since you threw the
Oh,
Madison,
yeah.
so I
Oh,
saw him
nice.
perform too, and it was man, had a choir and everything. It was beautiful.
Oh.
What a moment. That's great. Yeah, there was a lot of great music live this year, too, locally. I mean, it was a
So
great year
much.
for seeing
Yeah.
bands. What was some of your favorites,
Um,
if you have to pick?
I am wearing my Black Kids shirt.
Oh.
They reunited and played at Intuition Ale Works before playing. I don't know if anybody saw the videos of the Black Kids playing in Mexico City on Instagram, like in front of like 200,000 people.
How cool.
Yeah, and people singing every word to their song. That's a Jacksonville band that had a moment in the early 2000s. But
Yeah.
So that was cool to see them with 150 people at Intuition.
Yeah, that's great. The venue there, the size is really
It's
awesome
nice.
to see
Yeah,
bands.
yeah, you can get like some bigger acts in there, and it still feels intimate.
Are the Mountain Goats?
The Mountain Goats
play-
was Friday.
Friday.
And
It
Carissa
does
was
fun.
there.
Yeah.
Oh, were you?
They put on a great show. It was
They're
so
terrific.
cozy. It was just like a really fun time.
They're so fun. So, Matt, talk about what you're listening to right now.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about the term global music and how redundant that sounds in 2023 when you have like just Bad Bunny, for example, you know, a reggaeton artist who is like one of the most popular artists in the world. American hip hop artists are sampling Afrobeat, rock groups infusing like Turkish and desert rock guitar sounds. And so I think it's sort of a dated term to call it global music. And an album that I loved this year was from a guy named Genesis Owusu, who's a singer-songwriter and visual artist, and really like captures this sort of mashup of global sounds.
Here you can read the full list of JME's 60 favorite albums of 2023 at jacksmusic.org. There are links to listen to each album on your favorite streaming platform. Matt Shaw, Mr. Al Pete, Carissa Marquez, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's our program. If you missed anything, you can check out the rebroadcast at 8 o'clock. You can also find all of our shows at WJCT.org and on your favorite podcast platforms. Don't forget to join us Saturday afternoon at 4 p.m. for What's Health Got to Do with It, when neurologist Dr. Joe talks to two practitioners who use music and sound to heal. We'll be taking a short break for the holiday, but we'll return Tuesday, January 2nd. We thank you for all the support you've given us throughout the year, with special thanks to the people who called and wrote and commented